Welcome to Through My Eyes, our series of interviews with military veterans, sponsored by David Warner and produced by David Warner on the Studio 25 Podcast Network. I'm really honored to have with me today retired Major Roger Baker. Roger was a helicopter pilot, and he served in Vietnam from August of 1969 to August of 1970. Roger, thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And more importantly, thank you for serving our country. I appreciate that, too.
Well, you're welcome.
So let's go back to the earlier point in your life. Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in Syracuse, New York, and I grew up in a little town called Mattydale, which is just outside of Syracuse, 1943.
Okay. Did you go to high school in Mattydale as well?
Went to high school, North Syracuse High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I interview veterans, I always like to find out about the gap between the time you graduated high school and the time you actually either enlisted or got drafted. In your case, it's 6 years.
Correct.
Which is quite a long time. So I'm curious, what was going on in your life at that point?
I was trying to get through college. It took me 6 years to get the four-year degree, but I finally made it. I really struggled to get through college. I didn't have my heart in it, but I did it because it was the thing to do back then. But it was only a few days after I graduated that I got drafted.
Okay. So was Vietnam on your mind at all at that point? Did you knew what you were getting into? Because I think you told me that you actually enlisted after you got drafted, correct?
I got about 2 weeks after I graduated, I got my draft notice. So at that time, I decided I wanted to go down and enlist in order to get the officer candidate school option, because there was what they call a college op at that time. If you were a college graduate, they'd guarantee you OCS, and I wanted to be an officer, so I enlisted at that point.
Why did you want to be an officer?
Well, I had nothing better to do. And I was, to be honest with you, I was kind of drifting aimlessly at that point in my life. I didn't have much direction, and I think I was looking for something to give me some direction.
Okay. Was being a helicopter pilot part of the thinking at that point?
Well, that came just a little bit later. After I was in OCS, I kind of looked forward to what I really wanted to do in the military. I took the test for Special Forces and passed that. And then I took the test for flight school for flying, and I passed that one. And I was at the PX one day, and I ran into an old warrant officer pilot, and I asked him, I said, hey, I'm thinking about going to Special Forces or flight school. What should I do? He said, go to flight school, kid. And I did.
Well, if you went to Special Forces, you might not be sitting here today.
Well, who knows?
Yeah. So tell me about basic training. Where did you do that?
Basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I got there 4th of July weekend, 1966, 30 June. And I went through basic at Fort Knox with everybody else.
Okay.
And basic wasn't too difficult for me. I seemed to adapt quite quickly and to the military lifestyle.
Well, after 4 years of college and then another couple of years after that, were you in shape or?
I was in pretty good shape.
I
was in pretty good shape. I've been an athlete most all my life, up until right now anyway.
Were you an athlete in high school? Did you play football or anything like that?
I was on a gymnastic team, and I ran track, and I played football.
Okay.
I was a rope climber on the gymnastic team.
Rope climber?
Yeah.
I remember having to climb a rope in our gymnasium all the way to the ceiling. That was, I'm afraid of heights, so that didn't go over. I did it, but it's pretty scary. Anyway, any memorable moments in basic that pop into your mind right now?
Nothing in particular, except that, like I said, I found that I adapted quite well to the military lifestyle, and I didn't really have any problems at all. And it almost was like I finally found something I was kind of good at.
Okay, so you fit in.
I fit in. Yeah, okay. I did.
So on to your advanced infantry training. Where was that done?
That was at Fort Ord, California.
Okay.
And the same thing there, a lot of physical stuff. And again, I seem to adapt well to the environment.
Did you know that at that point that you were definitely going to be a helicopter pilot?
No, but I was thinking about it at that point in time.
Okay.
I was getting ready to go to OCS because I went to OCS right after infantry school, and I was thinking seriously about flight school at that point in time.
Okay. What I've heard about OCS is that it's a difficult piece of training. Is that true?
Again, a lot of challenges. The hardest part about OCS was being cooped up for 6 months, not going anywhere, not seeing any girls or doing anything socially, or it was. I think I got off post a couple times in the 6 months I was in OCS. So, but other than that, I kind of thrived on the challenge, to be honest with you.
Okay. It was in. You told me it was in Aberdeen Proving Ground.
That's correct.
Where you did
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So when one graduates from OCS, you're what, a second lieutenant?
Second lieutenant.
Okay. So now you know that you're going to go to flight school, right?
Correct. I had applied for it when I was in OCS.
Okay. And that your first phase of training, flight school, was probably Fort Walter in Texas?
Fort Walters, Texas.
Okay. Now, being a second lieutenant, and was your training right alongside all those guys that were training to be warrant officers?
No, the warrant officers were separate from the commissioned
Okay.
officers. It was two separate classes. So one class was pretty much almost all second lieutenants, and the other class was all warrant officers, and we were separate.
Okay. So you got some special treatment, you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, and we drew some TDY pay, which was nice, and flight school was quite a challenge for me. In the beginning, I had some difficulties in trying to fly a helicopter, but then I finally caught on, and I went through okay.
You must have had some classroom work as well.
Oh yeah, it was half a day of classroom, half a day of flying every day.
Okay. But you got through the classroom stuff, okay.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah. Well, you had a 4-year college degree. You knew how to study. I would
Well, I was never much of a studier.
think. Either was I. I had other things
It's
on
a
my
miracle
mind.
I got through college, I'll tell you right now.
Well, I understand that. Yeah. So do you remember the first time you got in a helicopter and got ready to fly? What was that like?
It was scary.
Yeah.
It was scary.
But you had a flight instructor with you.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. What happens? Tell me how that whole process works of learning the operation of a helicopter and that. But before you do that, what kind of helicopter was it?
It was an OH-23 Hiller helicopter.
Small,
bubble job, 3 people.
kind of like the Loaches that they flew in Vietnam, or smaller,
Except
or bigger.
much more primitive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and a recip engine. The ones we flew in Vietnam, the Loaches had turbine engines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a weaker version. It was just a training helicopter.
Yep. And they were older, much older. Yeah.
So I don't know much about helicopters, but I know you've got a cyclic, a collective, and then you've got 2 foot pedals. So there's got to be a lot of eye-hand coordination involved.
Everything you do affects something else, okay? So everything has to be coordinated together. When I first picked up that Hiller helicopter, I couldn't keep it in the state of Texas at a hover. It was like trying to swick a wet noodle up a wildcat's ass. But after a while, you begin to get comfortable and get used to it. And we had some very, very good instructors.
So how long did it take before you did your solo? How long would that be?
I think I had 16 or 17 hours before I soloed.
That's all? That doesn't seem like a lot.
Some guys only had 8 or 10. I took a little bit longer to solo.
Okay. But you made it through.
Yeah, solo was scary.
Really?
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the washout rate? Do you recall?
I don't really remember, but it was significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like 40, 50% maybe.
I don't think it was quite that high because Vietnam War was on at that time.
Oh, they wanted you.
And they needed us. They needed us bad. So what they would do if you were having troubles, they would recycle you. They would set you back a couple weeks to get your feet on the ground. So if it took a little longer for you to learn how to fly, I got set back 2 weeks. And after I got set back to 2 weeks, I've never failed another check ride again, or I zipped right through.
So was that training helicopter the only one you flew there?
At Fort Walters, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't get into Huey's until you went to
Fort Rucker
over in Alabama.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's go there.
Fort Rucker, the first 2 months at Fort Rucker were in a OH-13 Bell helicopter doing instrument training, and we got our instrument tickets. And then the last 2 months at Fort Rucker was in a transition to a Huey's.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the Huey. Good machine?
Great aircraft.
Yeah.
Chop down trees, shoot it full of bullet holes. They still keep flying.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a great aircraft.
How long did the training take at Fort Rucker?
4 months. 4 months at Walders, 4 months at Rucker.
Okay, 4 months each. So you're still a second lieutenant coming out of Fort Rucker?
First lieutenant.
Or first? Oh, you are. You might.
You're only a second lieutenant for 1 year, and then you got promoted to first lieutenant.
Okay. So chronologically, where are we now? At Fort Rucker, it's 1967, I would think, right?
Yes, I graduated from flight school in July of '67.
Okay. But you didn't go to Vietnam until '69. So tell me about that interview.
Well, I was very fortunate that right out of flight school, there was a handful of us that got stateside assignments. And I don't know why, but we did. And I got sent to Fort Carson, Colorado, which was it was a great assignment. And I spent a whole year there flying with guys that were back from Vietnam. And they were, it was like flight school continued on for me to fly with these veterans. I was young. Had a Thunderbird car and a motorcycle, and I was a hot shit. I was quite the guy back.
You were having a good time.
I was having a great time. I loved Fort, and I flew over a Pikes Peak in a helicopter when I was out there. And we won't talk to too many guys that did that.
Yeah, it had to be cool.
Yeah, we did a lot of mountain flying, and consequently, when my year was up at Fort Carson, I made captain. I got sent to the instructor pilot course at Fort Rucker, Alabama, en route to Vietnam. So by the time I got to Vietnam, instead of having 200 hours and just graduating from flight school, I had 500 hours of flight time, and I was a captain, and I'd been through the instructor pilot course. So I was several steps ahead of the average guy coming out of flight school going to Vietnam.
So you had a big advantage.
A big advantage.
Over most guys who just went straight over and were pretty green
I had
when they got there.
experience that was very valuable there at Fort Carson. Like I said, I flew with guys that were Vietnam vets, and they taught me a lot about, well, when you get to Vietnam, here's what you got to do. And I listened to them. Mm-hmm. My roommate was a guy named Bill Davis, who was a gunship pilot in the 1st Cav, and he taught me an awful lot about flying. He got killed in an airplane accident several years ago, but he was a great guy and taught me an awful lot about flying.
At Fort Carson, these were all Hueys you were flying?
Hueys, that's correct.
Did you fly a regular Huey? Did you fly a gunship at any point? Or they were just...
Not at Fort Carson. We didn't have gunships. It was stateside.
Yeah, that's true.
There were some OH-23 Hiller helicopters there, too, that we flew occasionally, but most of it was all in Hueys.
Okay.
And a lot of mountain flying.
So at what point did you find out that you were headed over to Vietnam?
Well, after I'd been at Fort Carson for a year, I got orders for Vietnam.
Okay.
That was July of 1969. And I got sent to Vietnam. I got there the 3 of August, 1969.
Okay, so tell me about the trip over. Charter jet?
Yeah, charter jet going over. I slept most of the way, to be honest with you, going over.
So you must have been pretty relaxed.
Well, I was ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is, most guys that ended up in Vietnam were fairly young. I mean, you were what, 20?
I was 26.
Yeah. So you were the old guy. You were the old man.
I was an older guy, and I was an experienced pilot, which, again, was to my advantage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Benoit, is that where you ended up?
Tay Ninh.
You were stationed there, but where did you actually land?
We landed at Benoit originally,
Benoit, okay.
And then I went from there to Tay Ninh. That's where the 1st Cav was, at Tay Ninh.
I always like to ask people who've been in Vietnam what their impression was the minute when they opened that door up and you got out?
Hotter than hell. We landed like at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was like 103 degrees. It was hot.
Yeah, humidity.
Hot, very hot.
How long did it take you to get climatized?
I never really did. It was always hot.
Okay. So you Tain Inn is where you were stationed. Tell me about that. Did you go by truck? Did you fly there?
I flew from Benoit, and a Huey picked us up and flew us up to Tain Inn. To the first cab was stationed at Tain Inn. Tain Inn was an area about 75 miles northwest of Saigon. It was fairly flat except for one great big mountain, which was called Nui Ba Din, which was the thing on TV the other day. There was a thing about Vietnam, and they showed the mountain Nui Ba Din. But okay. So that's where I was stationed almost my entire career. Just before at the end, we got moved on to Benoit, but I only had a couple of weeks left when we got moved.
So when you arrived, you were a captain.
I was a captain.
So I would think your living conditions were probably better than the average grunt, no?
Yeah, they weren't too bad. I mean, we lived in plywood hooches they're halfway up. They were screens, and they were nothing fancy. We had a mess hall, and there were maintenance tents out on the flight line.
Officers Club?
We did have an officers club that we made ourselves. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's always fun. Tell me about the first week there. What was that like?
First week was pretty quiet. I didn't do much. They just kind of let you get used to it. I didn't fly for several days. And then finally, they scheduled me to fly. And I got in with this young warrant officer who didn't like commissioned officers. And we flew just an ash and trash mission. It didn't last a couple hours maybe. And the guy never let me touch the controls. I never flew, and he never said anything to me because he didn't like commissioned officers, especially captains. So when we got back, I went over to flight operations and walked in the door, and I said, "Don't you ever schedule me to fly with that guy again." And I never did. But I was,
So you pulled your weight. You pulled your weight a little.
I pulled my weight a little, yeah. I wasn't afraid to.
Yeah. So
the guy was a good pilot. He just didn't like commissioned officers.
That common thing? I guess it was, huh?
Yeah.
First time flying by yourself? Or not by yourself, but on a mission by yourself? Do you recall that?
I recall it very well. I was with the unit instructor pilot, a guy named Lungwitz, who we called Lunchmeat, and we flew about 8 or 9 hours of combat assaults and ended up with a night final extraction of a loach that got shot down, had to get the bodies out. And I spent the whole day just trying to keep my aircraft behind the aircraft that was in front of us. And the guy I was flying was very busy. We were in the Yellow 2, which was the second aircraft on the flight, and we had to get all the artillery clearances. So he was busy on the radio talking artillery clearances with the flight leader, and I was busy trying to fly the aircraft. But I did okay. I was a pretty good pilot by then.
Okay. Did you get shot at that day?
We did, but I didn't know it. I didn't realize it.
So you didn't have time to get scared.
I didn't have time to get scared.
You were focused on what you were doing.
I was so overwhelmed by the whole thing that I didn't know we got shot at until they told me later.
Well, the door gunners probably did.
Yeah.
Were they putting themselves to use that day, the door gunners?
Door gunners they're great kids. We had a lot of young kids. A lot of them were ex-infantry guys that had extended to stay in Vietnam so they could get out when they came home. And they just sat back there behind those guns, and they had a lot of guts, I'll tell you.
Yeah. When you flew, did you have the same door gunner and crew chief every time, or did that kind of rotate?
After I became an aircraft commander and a flight leader, I had the same crew chief and door gunner every day, unless the aircraft was down for maintenance or something. But we had certain aircraft were designated flight leader aircraft because they were the best aircraft. Being a flight leader, you always got the best of everything. You got the best crew chief, best co-pilot, and best aircraft. And after I'd been there for 3 months, I became designated as a flight leader, which was called the Yellow One. I think you saw that in the book.
I did.
Yellow One. And so I got the best of everything, which you need it when you're leading the flight, you know.
How long were you a pilot before you became aircraft commander?
3 months.
3 months. What does an aircraft commander actually do?
He's just a pilot in charge, that's all. They call him an aircraft commander, but it's just a fancy name for a pilot in command.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy that sits in the left seat and is in charge of that aircraft.
But you're not flying it. The pilot is.
Well,
Or is it a co-pilot or a pilot with the aircraft commander?
aircraft commander, you could, if you wanted to fly, you flew. If you didn't, you told the other guy to take the controls. You know, you did about, we usually split it up about half and half. Because I'll tell you, after flying 10 or 12 hours, you become physically exhausted. And it takes two guys to do it. And at the end of the day, you're just so tired you can't even stand up hardly.
Okay.
The longest day I ever had was 12 hours without shutting the engine off. And at the end of the day, I was just exhausted. So that's another reason we had two pilots.
Do you have enough fuel for 12 hours? Or did you have
Hot refueling.
Hot refueling?
Yeah, we
Meaning, explain that.
kept the aircraft kept running. We would land right at the place where the gas pumps were, and
I see what you mean. You just didn't turn the engine off.
didn't turn your engine off. No,
Wow. Okay.
which was considered dangerous, but that was the only way over there we could do it.
Well, you probably did a lot of things that were dangerous.
Yeah, we did.
When you were flying, did you have any restrictions on who you could fire at, what you could do?
Yes, in those certain areas you couldn't shoot back, even if you got shot at. But most of the time, we flew in areas where we were up against the North Vietnamese, and it was pretty much a free fire zone. If we got shot at, we shot back.
Okay.
On a regular basis. Our mission was to take the infantry guys and place them as close as we could to the bad guys out in a hole in the jungle. And it'd be a flight of 6, 8, maybe 10 aircraft. The biggest flight I ever led was 20 aircraft. And we always had several gunships covering us. And they always fired artillery into the landing zone before we landed. So as a flight leader, your mission was to be just breaking over the trees when the last artillery round went off into the landing zone, and then go on in and land. Okay. I always said it's not the guy that kicks the door in that counts. It's the first guy through the door. And that was usually me.
Dangerous stuff.
Yeah. And, I found the same thing on the police department when I work as a cop. It's not the guy that kicks the door, and it's the first guy that goes through the door.
Okay. Tell me about what would be the scariest mission or the worst mission you had where things just didn't go well?
Well, I had several of those where people got shot on board in the back, but they were all pretty scary. The apprehension of breaking over the tree line into the landing zone and not knowing whether or not, sometimes there was nobody there and we didn't get shot at. And other times you were landing right in the middle of the hornet's nest, and the door gunners would start shooting back. I had a mission one time where we were on emergency resupply mission where my co-pilot was actually flying the aircraft, and his chin bubble got shot out, and a piece of plexiglass hit him in the leg, and he jammed in full left pedal when he did that. When he did, the aircraft almost tipped over. And I grabbed the controls. I took the controls away from him, and I flew the aircraft in, and we dumped off the ammunition and stuff to the infantry guys. But that was one of the worst ones I ever had.
Okay. So at some point, you went from being an aircraft commander to being commanding officer.
Right.
And you were. I want to make sure I get this right. Charlie Company, 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion, part of 1st CAV, right?
Correct.
Okay. So how does one go from being an aircraft commander to how did that happen for you? How did you get that promotion?
Our CO got killed.
This was Bill Lorimer?
Bill Lorimer. Yeah. Bill was the XO when I got there. And then after 6 months, this Major Antros left, and Bill was the senior captain, and he became the company commander. And about 3 weeks after that, he got shot and killed. He was my best friend and a great guy, a great commander. And he got shot and killed. And I was the XO at the time, and I took over the company. I was a junior captain, and there were a lot of majors up at battalion staff that were a little bit jealous that I got the slot. But our battalion commander was a guy named Robert Patton, no relation to George Patton, but he was a great guy, and he liked me, and he decided that I should take over the company, so I did.
Okay.
That's how I become company commander.
Can you tell me how Lorimer got killed?
He got shot. He got shot flying a combat assault.
Any details about that?
I wasn't on the flight that day,
okay.
so all I know is they were on their way to land in a landing zone, and they started taking a lot of fire, and he got shot and killed.
Crashed a helicopter?
No, the co-pilot took over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty scary stuff.
I've met his daughter, Lorimer's daughter. I've been to several conventions and reunions, and she never got over. She was just a baby when he got killed, and she really never got over losing her father like that, you know.
Well, you mentioned that he was your best friend over there.
Yeah.
How does one go from hearing that his best friend is killed, and then you've got to go right back to work after? How do you deal with that grief?
Well, you just keep marching, I guess, you know. That's one way to deal with it, is stay busy, you know. And I was right up to my ass in alligators.
Yeah, I bet.
Being a company commander. I was tactically a very astute pilot and aircraft command flight leader, but I wasn't really real sharp on being a company commander. I didn't know a lot of administrative stuff. And fortunately, I had some great people working for me, and they took care of me.
Okay.
That's one thing I learned from being over there about leadership, is if you take care of your people, they take care of you. And
good point.
Both my sons are sergeants on the police departments locally up in Syracuse, and I told both of them when they got made sergeants, I said, take care of your people, and they do. So.
Well, that's how you earn respect, right?
Exactly.
And they'll go to the wall for you.
Yep.
Tay Ninh was, what, 20 miles from Cambodia?
Yeah,
Something
maybe
like that?
30, 40 miles.
Okay.
It's up in the Fishhook region.
So it's pretty close. And you were there in the spring of 1970. And there was a lot going on in this country at that point.
There was.
You had Kent State on May 4th. College campuses were in an uproar. They shut a lot of them down, including mine. I didn't have to take final exams that spring because
the
Cambodian
Cambodia invasion was in spring
exactly.
of 70.
The public found out that the war had been extended into Cambodia, and there were all these issues. So my question is, did you know about that? Did you hear about what was going on over here while you were over there fighting the war? How did you feel about that?
Not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
Did you fly into Cambodia a lot? You probably did.
I was in on the initial invasion into Cambodia, yeah.
Okay. So what was that? Can you talk about that at all? What was...
It was pretty hairy. We took a lot of fire, lost a few aircraft.
I think I read in the book that...
It was a 40-ship combat assault into Cambodia.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of your guys, I'm trying to remember his name, Takarsky? Did I have that right? Nickname Tango or something like that?
Tatarsky. Les Tatarsky. He was killed.
Yeah, how did that happen?
He was out flying a mission with another guy. I can't even remember. I think it was a resupply mission. He got shot and killed. Yep. Yeah.
So when you were going into Cambodia, were you bringing in South Vietnamese soldiers or were you bringing in American soldiers?
Some of each.
Some of each?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't like flying with the South Vietnamese soldiers too much. That was a little bit of a problem.
Well, that's where I was going with that. Were they good fighters, bad fighters? I heard they weren't so great. I've read that.
They were okay, but they didn't secure. Like a lot of times we would go in what they call a final extraction to pull the guys out. Mm-hmm. And with the Americans, you never had to be concerned about the security of the landing zone or the pickup zone, because they would always make sure it was secure. But with the South Vietnamese, that wasn't always the case. They would always run to get on the aircraft, and sometimes you only could have a certain amount of people on your aircraft weight wise, and sometimes there'd be like 14 of them to get on one aircraft and 3 on another one, and so the crew chiefs would end up throwing them off, and it was difficult.
Were there times when you were dropping guys off that you couldn't literally land? You were like 10 feet off the ground, they had to jump off?
We never really touched down. We kept it at a low hover when they were getting out. But yeah, a lot of times you'd be over bamboo or this real tall grass. You'd be 8-10 feet up, and they'd jump out.
You were never wounded yourself?
No.
Okay, so you're pretty lucky then.
Very lucky.
Now,
I had bubbles shot out around me and bullet holes in my aircraft, but I never got shot.
how much armor did you have around you?
You sit in an armor-plated seat. Okay, it was ceramic, and it was pretty good for small arms. But with a 50 cal, 50 cal would penetrate it. And one of the problems we had over there was we were up against the NVA anti-aircraft battalions, and what that was is there was 3 51 caliber machine guns set up in a triangle out in the woods, and each one was supported by an infantry company. And if you flew through that triangle anyway, you would take fire from all 3 51 cals plus the infantry that was around them. That was pretty scary. And at night, 51 caliber bullets looked like big green basketballs coming up at you. It was pretty scary.
Their tracers were different colors, right? Than
green.
Yours. They were green. Yours were what?
Orange.
Orange. Okay, so I could tell the difference.
Yeah. And sometimes those were orange too. It depends. A lot of the ammunition they use is stuff they stole from us or got from us, So, but at night, it was scary. Nighttime, you asked me how I was mostly petrified. Flying at night was scary, real scary, because you couldn't see what you were doing, I probably dreaded flying at night more than anything.
Okay, yeah. So when you were going in, is it true that they would mark the landing zone with a particular color smoke?
White phosphorus.
But they wouldn't tell you what it was.
Oh, well, yeah.
Because
because the bad guys would pop smoke too.
They would know.
They would pop smoke, and we would identify it.
Right. Okay. As opposed to doing it the other way, if they caught the radio transmission.
Yeah,
they would.
Those were like for emergency supply missions or medevacs, things like that, where we had to go out and land in the jungle someplace when they were in contact and bring out the wounded or bring in supplies and stuff.
Okay. Okay. Can you literally reconstruct a mission? So you're at Tain and you're at base, and how does that happen when you need to go out and do something in like say a medevac mission? Did you do those?
Yeah.
Okay. So how does that happen? How do you find out what's going on and where you have to go and how do you get there and all that stuff?
Well, most of the medevac missions that we flew were spur of the moment things, where we actually were in the area and we knew someone got wounded or shot, and they would give us a rough location, and then when we would get out there, we'd tell them to pop smoke, and then we'd identify it.
Okay.
And that's how we go in,
Yeah.
We flew the same area quite a bit, so we knew it quite well.
It had to be brutal picking up guys that are either dead or badly wounded, putting them in there. How many could you carry at a time?
Well, I don't know, 3 or 4 probably in the back. The medevacs sometimes they wouldn't go in when we would because we had guns on us and the medevacs didn't.
Right.
And we would just go in and they just flop them on the floor in the back and we'd get them to the hospital as quickly as we could.
So the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, they didn't have any problem firing at a medevac. That was actually labeled as a medevac.
They'd fire at them.
They didn't care.
We didn't have too much to do with the Viet Cong. That was mostly down in the Delta. Most of the area, the enemy that we fought against were regular NVA soldiers, okay, instead of Viet Cong, who were like guerrilla warfares.
Yeah, the NVA was a more highly trained soldier. Yeah. That's interesting. So, did you get an R&R at some point?
I did. I went to Hong Kong.
How was that? Tell me about that.
It was kind of neat. It was a great marketplace. You could buy just about anything there. And so that's where I went.
Cheap electronics?
Oh, yeah. All the stereo stuff and all that. I just got rid of all my Vietnam stereo stuff. It's all outdated now, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's all analog.
Tape decks and
yeah,
amplifiers and all that stuff. Yeah.
So at some point, you're getting to where your time is short. You're flying a helicopter. Let's say you got 2, 3, 4 weeks left. What were you thinking?
It just kept going. It didn't, you know, it would be hell to get shot down a week or two before you're leaving. But we tried to wean guys off flying towards the very end. But the trouble is we were so short on pilots. When I first got there, we had like 40 pilots. And when I left, we were down to like 28 or something. We were shortage of pilots.
Okay. Getting back to, I meant to ask you this before and I forgot. You went from being an aircraft commander to being
company commander.
Company commander. What does a company commander do?
He's responsible for everything that happens. It's a huge responsibility because everything that happens to anybody in that company, you're responsible for. We had a rocket that landed in our company area one morning, killed 3 and medevac 10 back to the States. And I was crushed. And there was nothing I could do about it. I mean, right. Not a thing, but I still felt responsible for those guys that got killed. You know.
How many people are we talking about that you commanded?
200.
200 in a company?
Yep.
Okay.
20 helicopters and 200 guys.
That's a lot to be responsible for.
It is. It is. Yep. It was. I grew up in a hurry. I was a different guy when I came back home, you know.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. But getting back, I just want to go back a little bit. Your training. When you left the States, do you feel like you were ready for what you had to do?
I did.
You had a lot of experience.
I did. Yep.
So that was all worthwhile.
Yep. But like I said, I received a lot more training than most guys did.
Right. Yeah.
And training's everything. It's everything in the military.
So you leave and you left your unit. What was that like when you left?
It was hard. I didn't want to leave them. You know, I felt like I was bailing out on them, but I almost extended. I was going to extend over there and go to the gunships, and a couple more guys got killed, and I finally said, no, I'm not going to extend. I'm going to go home, and I'm glad I did.
How many were killed? Do you have an idea how many were killed?
In my company?
Yes.
13.
13. It's a lot.
Yeah, their names are on the wall down in Washington.
Have you been to the wall?
I've been there a couple times.
Yeah. Pretty awesome experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there myself.
Yeah.
I mean, as a civilian, different for me, it had to be very emotional for you.
Well, you know what's amazing about it? It's so quiet.
Right. Yeah.
You can hear a pin drop there, you know.
True.
Yeah.
I took my kids there.
Yeah, my friend Bill, I took my kids there too. Yeah. My friend Bill Lorimer, he's on the wall down there.
Did you trace his name?
I did. Yeah. It's hanging on the wall in my bedroom.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. So you get back to the States. Some people, I don't know where you landed. Maybe you can tell me. But
San Francisco.
So any protesters waiting for you?
No, I don't.
You didn't go through that?
I didn't go through that too much. No.
Okay. So tell me about, you were still in the service when you got back. You had time left, and you were in for a while. Tell me about
I had another year to go, and I got stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia. And I wanted to be an instructor pilot, but they said, no, if you got your combat command time, we're going to make a staff officer out of you. And I'm not a good staff officer, I'll tell you right now. And I worked at post headquarters down at Fort Stewart, Georgia for a year, and then I got out, and I went home. But shortly after I got home, I joined the reserves, and I stayed in the reserves for another 24 years. So I ended up with 30 years service at the very end. I got activated for Desert Storm and got sent to Fort Drum, New York. And what happened after about 20 years in the service, I was a major up for promotion to lieutenant colonel. But if I made lieutenant colonel, I would have had to give up flying.
Oh.
And I didn't want to give up flying. So the Army, in all their wisdom, said to me, if you want to keep flying, you can be a warrant officer. So I took a downgrade from major to warrant and stayed another 10 years. And that's when I got activated for Desert Storm, but only got sent to Fort Drum. They took the medevac unit from Fort Drum, sent them over, and we backfilled for them at Fort Drum. So I spent a year on active duty at Fort Drum flying again. And then finally, after 30 years, the Army reorganized and said, if you're a pilot with over 20 years, you can go to the National Guard, but if you got over 20 years, you got to get out. Well, I had 30 years, so I got out. But I'm drawing a nice pension today because of all that active duty I had, and I retired as a major. So I made W4 on reserve duty, but I retired as a major.
So were you in the reserves when you were a policeman as well?
Yes.
They were overlapping then.
I was. And what the great part about that is New York State Civil Service, they have to give you 30 days a year military leave for full pay. So I made the best of it.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Yeah. I did real well.
Why police work?
Well, I flew a helicopter for the Syracuse Police for a couple of years.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
They had an old Hiller helicopter, and I qualified for that, and I flew it for a few years, and then they did away with it, and I ended up in a police car, and I flew a police car for the next 16, 18 years.
It's a bit of a downgrade,
well,
I would think.
I enjoyed it. It was a good job.
Yeah.
Both my boys are cops, and I never had 2 days the same. Every day was a little bit different. And I'll tell you, I think my background from Vietnam, having been shot at, helped me a lot in the police work because I knew how to handle the stress. It just the two kind of went hand in hand.
Oh yeah. I would think you were well prepared for that kind of combat.
Yeah. I knew how to handle the stressful situations.
What does a police helicopter pilot do? I mean,
we flew around in circles over the city a lot. I can tell you that. And
sightseeing or what?
I got bored with it, so that's why I got out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was going to try to get on the state police, but I was too short. You had to be 5'9" to be a trooper, and I was 5'8.5", and I never made it with the state police. But then I got on with the local city cops, and I was just as happy. So,
that was a good experience.
Oh yeah,
and another good retirement.
Well, I was telling the guys on the way up, I'm drawing 2 retirements, neither one of them what you could live on, but you put 2 together, it's not too bad.
That's pretty darn good. Yeah.
And plus, you got some benefits with the retired military too, as far as medical. About back in 2015, I had a brain bleed. I was in the hospital for 52 days.
Wow.
Half of that in intensive care. And the fact that I had TRICARE insurance coverage through the military, I didn't cost me a nickel. And the bill must have been in the millions. They had to operate on my head, and they did all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So you saw some bad stuff in Vietnam.
I saw some bad stuff, but I wouldn't trade my military experience for anything. It's too bad I fought in a war that sucked, but it's the only war we had at the time. And I made some great friends that I still have today. We're still in touch. We call each other or email or whatever. And
they say the bonds made in combat are the most unbreakable bonds there is.
And the two kind of go hand in hand with the job of the police department too.
Right.
Like these guys,
Yeah.
So it all fit in for me. Pretty much. I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, you're lucky you survived. And I think, all the training you had, that had to have helped you survive that.
Absolutely.
Flying that helicopter.
Absolutely. Like I said, when I got overseas to Vietnam, I was a jump ahead of everybody else. And they saw that, and they decided, well, we're going to make it. I was so proud when they selected me to be a flight leader, because being a flight leader was a huge responsibility. I mean, you were the first guy into the landing zone. Everybody, when I said follow me, they did, you know, and I was responsible for every aircraft. When you got into the landing zone, you came to a hover, and your infantry guys would jump out.
Right.
You couldn't take off until the last aircraft got in and unloaded his troops, so you all took off together. If you took off one at a time, the gunships couldn't cover you. They couldn't stay with you. So the flight had to stay together. And if we took fire while we were flying along, the formation would get tighter all of a sudden, you know?
First in, last out, huh?
Yep. There was safety in numbers somehow.
Yeah, got it.
But it was a well-coordinated, organized operation. And like I said, being a flight leader was quite a deal.
How did all of that affect you personally? Take a lot out of you? Were you a different guy? You mentioned that you were a different guy.
It just gave me a lot of self-confidence, I think. You know, I had a lot of self-confidence in myself after that.
Well, what about PTSD? Did you have any problems with that?
No.
No, you're okay. You're fortunate.
Nope, I guess.
Any Agent Orange issues?
Not that I know of. I got some high blood pressure. I'm getting 20% disability for hearing because all this year is flying.
Right. That's pretty common.
Yeah. But other than that, no.
So you mentioned you still have buddies are these guys that you actually served with in
Absolutely,
Vietnam?
yeah.
So what do you talk about? You get together.
Well, I haven't been to a reunion now for for a while there. The Vietnam VHPA, which is Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, has a convention every year. And for several years I went to that. But now I just don't like traveling, so I haven't been to it in several years now. But we just talk about the old days. Hey, remember when you did this and when you did that? And there's a kid named Neil Bloom, who lives out in Minnesota. He was my co-pilot the first day I ever flew as a flight leader. And whenever I see him, he says, hey, remember that I was your co-pilot that first day? He says, you were really scared. I said, yeah, I wasn't scared of the bad guys. I was scared of screwing up the flight, you know?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So you must have received some medals, Roger. Tell me.
Everybody got medals over there.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, I know you're being modest.
I got a DFC and a Bronze Star and Air Medal and, you know, the usual stuff.
So the DFC, was that due to a particular mission or just your time there?
It was my time there mostly.
Okay. How about the Bronze Star?
Same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's all cool stuff.
A lot of the medals over there, it all depended on who saw it and who wrote you up. Because if nobody happened to see it, or you didn't get written up for it, or you know, it didn't. Some people got a whole chest full, and other people didn't get diddly squat. You know. But
I'll give a shout out to our producer over here. David has a Bronze Star.
Okay.
Yeah. He won't say anything. So you mentioned earlier that the war sucked. And I think we'll end this with this bit of conversation. How did that make you feel with the way the war ended? Actually, 50 years, right? 1970.
What a waste. What a waste.
Yeah. Yeah, it was terrible.
All those names on the wall down there, and for nothing.
For nothing.
For nothing.
Yeah, and most everybody that I've interviewed, and I think I've done, 17, 18 of these things, and a lot of the guys felt the same way. They felt let down. And they also felt that the war should not have been run from Washington. How'd you feel about that?
Well, yeah, it was. You couldn't win. You just couldn't win, no matter what you did.
Well, when you talk about the rules of engagement...
Well, like I said, we were supposed to have up almost 50 pilots, and when I left, we had like 25. You know?
It's incredible.
Tremendous shortage, and they were winding the war down, and, you know, there's no easy way to wind a war down. No easy way to do that.
Yeah. Did anybody in your unit get captured?
In my battalion, yes.
Okay, but not in Charlie Company.
No, Alpha Company had an aircraft get shot down out in the AO out there, and they put out a mayday, but they weren't sure where they were, and they ended up getting shot down. After they got on the ground, the pilots and the crew chief went one side of the area where they were, and the door gunner ran to the other side. And the door gunner hid in the woods and saw the NVA come out and capture the crew. And
the whole crew?
Well, they got everybody except him.
Oh, okay.
And then he wandered around out there, and 2 days later he walked into a fire base and told them what had happened. And we ran a mission into Cambodia with 20 helicopters to try to rescue these guys, but we got there too late. They had gotten them out just before we got there. So, yeah, they were people who got captured. That was our biggest fear. I wasn't afraid of getting killed, but getting captured, yeah, I was afraid of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the end of the line pretty much.
Yeah.
There was a local guy, one of only 2 kids who got killed in Vietnam from Little Falls. One of them was captured, and he died in the jungle in a Viet Cong prison camp on Christmas Eve.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty sad story. He just probably starved to death.
I was always a big fan of John McCain's because he got through 5 years of being a prisoner of war and still had his head screwed on straight, you know?
Yeah. I always admired him, too. I read all his books.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah, great guy. Yeah. He should have been a president.
Oh, exactly. I think he waited a little too long.
He did. His timing was bad.
Yeah, and he picked the wrong VP, too.
He did. You're right. You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
So any final thoughts about your service, Roger?
No regrets. I have no regrets at all. Like I said, I'm pretty comfortable now, and I'm getting some good benefits from it. The guys I was in the reserves with, I should close with this, probably tell you this one story. We were in the reserves together for like 20-something years. The same guys. We flew together. And we still get together we shut our unit down in 1996 was the last year that we did anything. And we still get together once a year at my house in the fall for a clam bake picnic. Mm-hmm. And there are some other Vietnam vets around that found out that we're doing this, and they end up coming to my house. So every fall, it's always the weekend after Labor Day, you'll see a tent set up in my driveway and a bunch of cookers, and we're all there. And most of the guys are reserves guys, but some of the guys are guys I flew with in Vietnam, too.
No, that's a good way to stay in touch.
It is a good way.
Big party.
Yeah, big party every fall.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you doing this. Thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
Nice to meet you and finally talk after a couple of phone conversations.
Well, I hope somebody's interested. One thing I wanted to mention, too, is the guy that taught me to be a flight leader, his name was Don Robert Thompson, and we called him Thumpy. He was a little guy. I got a picture of him. I'll show you. And he just passed away last year. So a lot of the guys are biting the bullet. They're going down, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I meant to mention that there was this book written by Roy Mark, I think his name was.
Yeah, he's been to our conventions.
Yeah, Fixing the Diarrhea, and you wrote the foreword for that book. So if anybody's interested in learning more about...
Roy's been to the convention with us.
Has he really?
Yes, he has.
So you met him?
Yes, I have.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, good enough.
It's really something to have a book written about something you did, I'll tell you.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, and you're in the book. And
Yeah.
You mentioned your name a bunch of times, actually.
Yeah. Now, did you read the second book? There's 2 of them, you know. There's 2 books.
No, I only read one. What's the second one
called? The second one is... the heck's the name of it?
I can look it up. I'll Google
Look it up. There's a second book, too, that he wrote about the same thing. Okay. So, yeah.
Good. Very nice to have you. I appreciate you doing this.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of Through My Eyes. See you next time.